Welcome everyone this morning. Thanks so much for being with us. We're so glad you're spending your Friday morning with us, and that we are going to be your first Max Minutes 2024. We're going to give it just one more minute for folks to filter in, and then we'll get started. I've got 9:03, so we will go ahead and begin. And I'm really excited that, again, y'all are all able to join us this morning with a few members of my team to talk through a new report that we released at the end of last year. It's got a lot of really great data on workforce trends across the state of Georgia. So before we dig into the presentation, I want to say thank you to the anchor investors of Max. We really could not do our programming without these partners. So if you see these organizations or you work with them, please thank them for their investment in workforce development solutions across the metro Atlanta area. So again, my name is Daniela Perry. I serve as the Vice President of the Georgia Chamber Foundation, and I serve as the Max Board Secretary. And I'm really glad to be joined with a couple of my colleagues to talk through our new economic report on the war for talent and workforce shortages that we're seeing across the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Will and Savannah on my team to introduce themselves and get started with this morning's program. So over to you guys.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Daniela, and it's good to be back with everybody today. My name is Will Bostelman, and I serve as the Public Policy Manager with the Georgia Chamber Foundation. I'm also here with Savannah Taylor.
Hey, y'all. I'm Savannah Taylor. I'm the Public Policy and Research Manager at the Georgia Chamber.
Well, thank you, Savannah. And it's good to be here with all of y'all. Again, I think I had the privilege of presenting to y'all last April, so it's good to be back and see some familiar friends and new friends as well. As Danielle mentioned, we're going to talk about our Q4 War for Talent, Future of Talent report from last year, but don't worry, the data is still very relevant going into 2024. Just kind of a real quick background on these reports. Last year, in order to give some better insights to those in the business community and at the General Assembly, we really looked at ways of how to deliver those insights. So we started doing a series of quarterly reports focusing on infrastructure of the future, economic dynamism, rural Georgia, and then lastly, this future of talent piece, which covers everything from early learning to K through 12 to higher education to our existing workforce and the unique challenges and needs and opportunities there for each of those groups, as well as some of the strengths that each of those have. So we'll just hop right in. We'll kind of do a real quick brief summary and overview of Georgia as a whole, where we've been, where we're headed, and then really dive into those our report as well. So I think it's no secret to the people in this group, the economic growth in Georgia, the unprecedented project announcements across our state. We've had 2,200 in the past 5 years, all in different regions of Georgia. So that's been great. That has brought in $134 billion in capital investments for those projects alone. We've been the 10th state for 10 years in a row, consecutively the #1 state to do business in around the nation. We've had 100,000 jobs created as well as a part of that, along with seeing 68% $68 billion in real GDP growth through these projects over the past 5 years. So definitely appreciative for all the partners in that growth. Let's go to the next slide. And here's just kind of a breakdown of those projects statewide over the just last year alone. So as you look around, you see we've definitely had projects all throughout Georgia, but there's been regions that have definitely grown more and had more announcements, specifically kind of down on the coast and up in Northwest Georgia, excuse me. But if you kind of look down to some of the South Central parts, you see some areas where there's definitely some room for improvement. That's where I call home. So that's a special area to me. And you can also kind of look at the greater metro region and see the growth there as well. But just really quickly on a kind of real quick snapshot of Georgia's economy right now relating to kind of workforce development. When we look through the top occupations in demand right now, #1 is registered nurses. And I really think that most of the top 10 are in the healthcare industry. With that, we also see a large demand for software developers and those in the retail space. Right now, we've got about just over 5.1 million Georgians employed in the state. That brings our labor force participation rate at 62%. We'll dive deeper into that as we get into the report a little bit more. We've also got an unemployment rate of about 3.4%, which is all Q4 numbers from last year. So definitely we're in a good spot, but do have some room for improvement there. Shifting a little bit, last year, with all of our quarterly updates in our Red Book, we partnered with Deloitte to do our CEO survey to really get a pulse from our executives around the state, from a multitude of different industries, business sizes, geographic locations, to really figure out where they thought the state of our economy is and as it relates to business now and where we're headed over the next kind of the short-term 12-month, 24-month period. And I think it's really insightful when you look at this and you see that those business leaders are while they might not be as optimistic about the growth of the United States economy over the next 12 months, you can really see how optimistic they are about Georgia specifically as we continue to grow, and these executives help grow their own businesses, relocate businesses here, and attract new businesses here. So very excited for that here in Georgia. I think everybody on this call, and there's several who aren't, who kind of play a big part in that. So appreciative for all the hard work in this state. And then as we kind of dive into looking at kind of some of the key metrics that we look at, issues that are important to businesses that we talk about all the time, when you look at it and you see that the number one concern is winning the war for talent for most of our executives, specifically those in the larger corporation space, but we have many small businesses who can talk about this issue and how it affects their business as well. So definitely top of mind to many of the executives across the state. We also look at right up behind that is developing the infrastructure of the future, which is everything from freight and logistics to airports to trains to our interstate system in the state to the ports down in Savannah to healthcare and broadband. So really kind of encompassing a lot of things there. But those are the two big things that our executives are looking at in the next couple of months and going into the next few years is really important as we continue to grow and expand our economy in the state. And real quickly, diving deeper into those war for talent metrics that we're looking at. Of the CEOs we polled, 58% here are experiencing a workforce shortage, with 82% of that being here in Georgia. And I think when you look at kind of the slide or the graph on the right, you see that most need to grow their workforce by 6%. Some need to do it by 20, some only by 1%, which is just, it's imperative that we look to solutions to help these businesses be able to grow their workforce and meet market demand on that. It's just really cool. Like, no matter who you're talking to faces these same issues, and whether that 6% is 3 people or 300 people, it's important that we solve these solutions together. So with all that kind of being said, really quickly from the high level, we're going to dive deep into our Q4 report. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask them after we kind of wrap up here. We'll also make sure that each of you get a digital copy of our Q4 report that dives deeper down into the metrics that we'll cover real quick. So looking kind of at the big bucket driving trends as it relates to the future of talent, what we're really talking about is everybody aware is, we're really talking about people. And when we look to 2050, which is only 26 years away, which seems far, but is really just right around the corner, we'll see 3.1 million new jobs created, or about a 46% increase from where we are today. Along with that, in the same amount of time, we'll see 2.5 million new people calling Georgia home. So we'll have a total population of just over 13.4 million. So you can see that there's going to be some shortages that are going to be created there, as well as new jobs are created, and really not having the adequate population. But with that being said, with the exciting growth of new people coming to the state and our jobs continue to grow, and we've really got some opportunities here in the state to start now with our current growth, and then to look forward to this anticipated growth in the coming years. First off is our workforce participation rate, our labor force workforce participation rate. We hit on it a little bit. We've got nearly 40% of working age Georgians are not actively engaged in the workforce for whatever reason, whether that be childcare or the, as you'll see there, the career training aspect. We've got some wonderful CTAE programs for our high school and middle school students in this state. However, 40% of those who graduate have not completed any career training by graduation, which is just crazy to think about. Also, the conversation around regulatory barriers. If you're not familiar with it, definitely something I would suggest. We'll talk about it a little bit later in our presentation. We'll look through our report and look through some of our awesome sources to really kind of learn this issue. We've got so many occupational licensed jobs in the state, and there's of jobs available right now that people can go out and get. 1 in 6 require these occupational licensing. And then when you look at the high demand jobs, 1 in 4 are occupational licensed. And we really need to work on, those are good, safe, steady jobs that many Georgians could be in, but due to some regulatory issues are not able to talk about. And I believe Savannah will dive a little deeper into that.
And Will, I would just say before we dive into the rest of the presentation, when we're kind of looking at these driving trends, I think one of the biggest things as we sort of craft these reports is really to take all of these things into consideration, to kind of look at how they interact with each other and sort of weave together, and sort of take that and from our standpoint and what we're hearing from our members, look at, where can we sort of use this information to create the most opportunity for Georgians. So obviously, some of these are challenges. A lot of them are themes that we're seeing across the whole US as well. So not always unique to us specifically, especially with things like the labor shortages, but really just trying to work best for our communities and membership there too.
Thank you, Savannah, for hopping in real quick there. Just some demographic and community trends really quickly related to Georgia. When we're compiling these reports and looking at metrics as it really relates to anything, we really try to look and see where we are compared to similar competitor states, kind of who have the same economic climate, same population, and then regulatory and political climate as well. So when we look compared to those, we see that we've got a higher veteran and retiree population, which I think is no secret because we've got a wonderful defense and military infrastructure here in the state. And I don't think anybody needs to, or nobody needs to be made aware of how awesome our veterans are and how great they are in our workforce after they've left the military. However, with that, we've also got a lower millennial population. And if you look through as we go to 2040, we'll see kind of a decline in younger age people in as part of our state. So definitely a concern as we look to the future on attracting younger people. However, by then we'll also have seen a significant growth in our Hispanic and Asian populations around the state as well. So our population is getting more diverse and is shifting a little more older with the data we've been looking at. Our poverty rate right now is about 18.6%. We're kind of, I believe we fall behind on some of our competitor states in that, but look forward to opportunities to help Georgians get into jobs and bring that rate down. And then it's really kind of interesting to look at only 22% of Georgians have some college and technical training. So really looking at how do we help them complete those programs and get into the workforce and be engaged and citizens of this state. Savannah, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about early learning.
Thanks, Will. So just kind of diving into the rest of the report and the rest of this presentation, following sort of just that war for talent overview, we really wanted to structure the rest of the report to follow specific points, almost kind of chronologically in the war for talent pipeline. So everything from our early learning through our higher education, and then looking at the folks that are currently out of school or mostly out of school and are engaged in our workforce now. So one of the reasons that folks like to start at early learning, there's a lot of research out there that early learning programs, so this is everything before kindergarten, can really significantly impact outcomes for students in the long run, as well as in things like the shorter run. So looking at like 3rd grade literacy rates and 8th grade math, some of those key metrics that we look at for determining future success. There's a lot of evidence out there that students who participate in these early learning programs have lower rates of grade retention. So they're not being held back, they're moving along and kind of progressing in the grade levels as they should be, which is a great thing. And then students who participate in these programs also tend to have higher rates of high school graduation, sometimes as high as 10% above students who don't. So there's a really, really significant, like I said, long-term impact that can obviously affect those students long past they're in school. So we really just want to make sure that we are giving these students the best head start that they can have. And obviously that's going to impact our future workforce. So something that we're very concerned with. Unfortunately, looking at trends in Georgia now, 50% of our youngest children, so this is ages 3 and 4, are not currently enrolled in a public preschool program. So Georgia does have a public preschool program that is offered. It's actually expanded a lot in the last few years. Initially started at only 750 students, and now we're at over 65,000, which is absolutely fantastic. And this is a trend we're seeing nationally too. A lot of states have nearly doubled these programs in about the last 20 years, which has been really great. But as you can see, there has been a slight decline in pre-K attendance that hasn't necessarily fully recovered since the pandemic. So always looking for more opportunities to get those students engaged. And we do still have 2,500 kids that were on the wait list from the 2021 academic year. So there's clearly a lot of demand and interest for these programs. So just figuring out how we can kind of best shift our investments to meet that need. And then the other side of this, of course, these early learning programs are benefiting the students who are actually in these programs, but their families and kind of the broader economic implications as well. So we kind of talked at that labor force participation rate hovering right somewhere between like 61 and 63%, has been like that in Georgia for probably the last 5 to 10 years. So looking at ways that we can increase that, parents who are able to have their children participate in these early learning programs may have a little more flexibility in their day to look at work options for themselves as well, which is always really helpful, as childcare and family care can be one of the biggest barriers to employment for folks. And then one of the other things that we really wanted to dive into in this report was looking at these young children and kind of the family conditions in which they're at. So looking at things like the economic burden of their families. A lot of times, families with young children might not have as many resources as sometimes older parents might. And in Georgia, 29% of children lived in cost burden households. So think of children who, maybe in these households where families could potentially be struggling to make ends meet. They might be on some kind of living assistance. And obviously that can also have a really big impact on how those students are learning and their ability to learn. So something we also want to be mindful of as well. Will, can you slide to the next slide? Thanks. And then we just wanted to introduce a little bit of Georgia kind of compared to the rest of us in this area. So looking at some national trends, Georgia does have higher enrollment levels than the rest of the US, which is great. Again, always looking to increase that. State-funded programs across the board have certainly increased. And again, looking to continue that. And Head Start enrollment, which is a national program, has fallen again over the pandemic. So really just looking for ways to get those students engaged again in these programs. Will, next slide. I think over back to you.
Sorry about that. As Savannah mentioned, the conversation around literacy and early childhood literacy has really been important around the state and around the country. I think we've seen a real problem with our young students and around the country not being on the correct reading level metrics by the end of their respective grade completions. And here in Georgia, I think it's pretty astonishing to look at the literacy rates across ages and see that they're not too far off from each other. We've got a lot of younger students who can't read, as well as a good population of older adults who can't read as well, which is just critical literacy as to building our workforce pipelines and going throughout. But what we really like to focus on specifically is third grade reading levels. I know it kind of it's something everybody talks about, but it's a really crucial part of a child's life, because at third grade, that's when they stop learning to read and reading to learn as they go throughout the rest of really their life. And it's also can be used by community leaders to look at the number of prison beds that are needed, projected in the future. So it's a really key insight into the future economic and just overall success of communities and areas in the state and the nation. When you look at who's doing good, who's doing bad, Metro Atlanta definitely beats the state at 46.7% of students reading on the correct of third grade students reading at the correct levels by the end of their school year, which we get these measurements are from the Georgia Milestones assessments, which are given across the K through 12 landscape, but every third grade student in the state has to take it and is measured over their reading proficiencies. While Metro Atlanta does wonderful compared to our other regions, still 46.7% is not the ideal rate. For literacy, being on grade level by the end of it, our friends in our rural and hub communities really have some improvements as well. So it's really a conversation. We're very appreciative for the Georgia General Assembly last year working on two pieces of legislation that one gave local school districts as well as the Georgia Department of Education some next steps on how to improve these, as well as establish the Georgia Council on Literacy to really look at kind of the long-term solutions over where we're headed. So appreciative for the leadership there by our state to really tackle these issues and increase the amount of literacy for our children in this state. Next up with K through 12 education, we have the career technical and agriculture education, which is a very important workforce pipeline for students in our state coming through our K through 12 programs. And when you look at it, I think we've got 17 programs that range everything from manufacturing, agriculture, finance, business, marketing, hospitality, and tourism, and several more that really cover cross industries here that we have here in Georgia. Those students have higher graduation rates by about 12 points higher than students who are not in these programs. And as we mentioned earlier, 40% of students don't graduate with any sort of these trainings. So how can we increase that and make sure that these programs are aligned with our industry needs and our future industry needs statewide? But it's also important when we're talking about educating, whether it be early learning, K through 12 or higher ed, we've got to have a good enough workforce of educators to educate these people and better interact with them. So when you look at our kind of the teachers that are here in Georgia who have gone through one of our higher education institute to get a degree to teach, we see about just under 90% of those are staying in the state, with mostly being pre-K teachers at 92.4%. So definitely excited to keep a lot of that homegrown talent here within our state. But what's pretty alarming is when you look at teacher attrition rates in Georgia, and you look at 78% of the teachers that leave in a given year leave the profession altogether. It's not due to retirement or to accept another position. They just, for whatever reason, whether that be for having to take care of an older or younger family member or shifting in a new career focus, they leave. And then you look at 5.2% leave to accept another position and 11.5 leaves due to retirement, which is it's just shocking to think that many teachers are leaving for other positions. But lastly, on the K through 12 piece, wanted to end on a little happier note related to K through 12 education. We're very excited for the governor's office and education partners on establishing Georgia Match, giving our high school seniors in Georgia better opportunities to go into our technical college and USG programs and institutions in the state. This is the first year they've done it. We're super excited for it. I believe just under 120,000, maybe I think it was closer to 130,000 Georgia students were sent letters from a part of this program to let them know the schools that they could have been accepted into, whether that be a technical college or a USG institution. And they did a press release last week or early this past week that 12,000 students have taken that next step as a part of that program to enroll in a school and get that education and go on into the workforce. So we're super excited for that. And as we watch this program continue to grow this year and in the coming years. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Savannah to talk a little bit about higher education.
Thanks, Will. So the goal of this next section, really looking at higher education in the scope of how it interacts with workforce preparedness and then also opportunity for students across the state. Given the group, I have no doubt that most of you are very familiar with all of our different institutions, but we really wanted to give readers who may not be as familiar a really comprehensive overview of these institutions, what they offer in the way of workforce preparedness, and just kind of an overview as a whole. So we wanted to break this down into our different institutions of TCSG, USG, and our private. So kind of looking at all of those. For TCSG, obviously our technical college system of Georgia, we really wanted to look at enrollment across the board, and especially students who are dual enrolled. 25% of students in 2023 for that academic year were dual enrolled, which is a really huge percentage, and really important when you think about enforcing those workforce pipeline opportunities, making sure that these who are likely high school students that are dual enrolling, we kind of keep them in that pipeline, and it's a really, really important part of that for students. So that's something that we really, really love to see. And then again, that enrollment has increased in the past couple of years. I think there's a lot more students that are beginning to take advantage of these programs, either for full degree programs or for certificates. So there's a lot of different options that students can take advantage of, which is really great. And then 45% of students are considered economically advantaged or disadvantaged. So again, looking at that opportunity for students across the state. And the report goes into a little bit more detail, breaking in some different demographics. I'd highly encourage everyone to look at that as well. But we also want to note that TCSG works specifically to work with industry needs. So one of the things that TCSG does, they might partner with specific industries or business to look at curriculum. In 2022, they trained over 45,000 employees with 4.4 million hours of work, which is also really significant. So a lot of their programs are catering not only to the students currently in them, but again, also those K-12 dual enrolled and folks that are currently in the workforce. So a really, really important bridge there. Another piece of this that's a little bit newer, in 2022, the governor authorized the High Demand Careers Initiatives. So this is a state-funded program, and it's an apprenticeship program. So this works as a grant program for employers who are looking to host apprentices, and they can be awarded up to $10,000 per apprentice. In the first year of the program, we had over 127 apprentices with over 40 employers across the state, which is really great. So any opportunities that we can identify like this to kind of intertwine these education pipelines with our current industry is really great to see, and can really be supportive of the workforce and talent stuff that we're trying to do. Will, can you head to the next slide? Thanks. So looking at our USG system, one of the things we wanted to look at was enrollment over the past couple of years. So I would note that in the report, we look at number of degrees awarded. In 2022, undergraduate degrees did go down slightly. Our graduate degrees went up, but you can see that enrollment is still increasing. We have more or less hit those numbers that we were close to around the time of enrollment at the pandemic. So it looks like enrollment has kind of recovered there, which is really great to see. USG systems tend to support a slightly lower level of dual enrolled, but we do still have 4% of students, which is really great. And obviously there are tons of facilities across the state. So really looking to expand on that opportunity. We've got 26 institutions. And then one of the things that we also kind of looked at in the report was difference between enrollment at our research universities versus some of the state and comprehensive. We do have high enrollment at our research universities, which is really great to see, but overall across the board, enrollment in all of our USG institutions has increased. And this is even pre-pandemic since about 2019. So really great to see there. And then looking at our private institutions, we see a lot more of our specialty institutions kind of in this board. So enrollment's still increasing there. Our private institutions are going to house a lot of our like women's colleges and HBCUs. There's a lot of opportunities for financial grants, and some cases students can also still qualify for HOPE. So these are all things we kind of wanted to highlight to kind of showcase these opportunities that are still available for all students. And then the last thing that is in the report, I don't have it up here, that we did want to mention, the USG system recently launched the Georgia Degrees Pay, and this is a data tool that has information about degree attainment, student success, cost and affordabilities for all of the public colleges and universities. So this is something that would go in hand really well with things like the Georgia Match program, really just trying to make that decision process for families and students as smooth as possible as they're looking to transition into this time. So all things that we are excited to see. Will, can you head to the next slide? So the last part of this report that we wanted to dive into was looking at our existing workforce. Obviously, our educational pipeline is really great, but there are still a lot of challenges and opportunities with folks who are currently working. So we wanted to make sure we're highlighting all of that as well. And when we talk about the existing workforce, we're generally talking about folks from about 16 to 64 who are either currently employed or who are unemployed. So they're actively looking for work. So this is kind of the group that we're looking at. When we look at things like labor force participation rate, it is a little bit higher in Metro Atlanta, about 66% compared to about 58% across the rest of the state. So we always love to see that. But across Georgia, our labor force participation rate has decreased a little bit over the past few years. We obviously saw a dip during the pandemic, but Georgia's diverged a little bit from kind of what we're seeing at national trends. So always looking for opportunities to increase that and sort of working to identify some of the biggest major barriers to what's holding people back from that. Looking at some of our fastest growing industries, education services, arts and entertainment, healthcare and social assistance, transportation across the state. None of these are surprising. These are Georgia's biggest industries. When we hone in a little bit more on Metro Atlanta specifically, kind of looking into those subsets, we see a lot of things like manufacturing and telecommunications. So still a lot of growth happening and all things that play into that major industry across the state. So always looking to support those networks. And again, looking at those major barriers and opportunities. Will, can you head to the next one? Cool. So one of the things we wanted to look at was major barriers to employment. And the report kind of works through some of these things together, but the three major barriers that we see the most consistently across the board and hear from members, looking at occupational licensing, at child and family care, and at housing. So occupational licensing, those are going to be any of your jobs that require a license in order to participate. This can be anything from, looking at nursing certifications to, in some cases, like cosmetics and things like that. So this can be a really, really wide range of employment opportunities. 1 in 6 jobs in Georgia require a license, which is higher than what we see nationally. And then 25% of those are high demand careers. So this is just something to kind of take into account when we think about why people might be either struggling to get into these opportunities or why we are struggling to find people for these opportunities. So healthcare is one of our biggest. We see it consistently across the board, whether you're looking at fastest growing industries by job or opportunity. That is one that we consistently see in Metro Atlanta and elsewhere. That's a really big problem. So that obviously plays in there. Child and family care across the board. The reality is kids are expensive, and sometimes it can be really hard to find the flexibility to work with employment opportunities while also juggling children or older family members or any family members. So we have some really good information about kind of infant and young child care, playing a little bit into kind of what we talked about, that early learning. But just for infant care in Georgia, it's nearly 14% of the average family's income, which is a really significant portion. When we talk about living costs, we usually say that families should be spending no more than 30% on living costs. So considering that childcare for just one infant is almost half of that, that's a really significant portion of folks' income. And it's one that a lot of people may struggle to afford. So that's something that when we look at those early learning opportunities and also kind of where industry can play a role in providing some flexibility for that, it's something we're very interested in. And then obviously housing, No secret here with this one either. Home ownership rates have relatively been declining, especially in that key age range of 20 to 30, where you're looking at folks looking to buy their first home. So really looking to increase that first-time home ownership. And this one really, you look at housing as a way to build generational wealth, to have economic stability. So for folks who are looking to purchase a home and to start kind of building those stable opportunities where they want to be, that can serve as a really, really big barrier as well. So something that we're also concerned with. Will, last slide. So looking at all of these challenges, we also wanted to look at some opportunities. So the graph on the right is looking at unemployed people per job opening. So as of 2013, at that line all the way up the top, that's going to be that we had 3 unemployed people for every job opening. So we had more people looking for jobs than we had jobs available. Obviously, we see that spike again in 2020, which is not surprising. But if you look at where we're currently at, as of 2023, we have less than half of a person for every job opening. So we don't have enough people in the state for all of the job openings that we have, which obviously can be a really big challenge for employers when they're looking to fill those positions. So we also wanted to dive into what we think are some potential solutions from what we are hearing from our membership and across the research. So second chance hiring is an initiative that we have looked into. So this would be hiring individuals who potentially have a record. There is a lot of positive research out there that, if folks are able to avoid rearrest for 5 to 7 years, their recidivism rates are much lower. Employed individuals are twice as likely to avoid rearrest. So looking at opportunities where it's appropriate to get those folks back into the workforce. Obviously, childcare solutions is huge. There's a lot of evidence out there that if we can work on flexible childcare solutions, if families can spend no more than 10% of their income on childcare overall, that we could see significant economic growth, really just from folks participating in the workforce where they may not have been able to before, and then also giving those children those early head starts. Looking into retraining and upskilling opportunities, especially for our young workers who are maybe kind of still looking at their workforce opportunities, but also for professional, kind of more seasoned workers who maybe need to kind of shift gears or sort of work to more or different opportunities in the workforce. So looking for opportunities where we can consistently push folks to do that, to kind of meet new demands and new opportunities. And then looking at the retired workforce, 1 in 6 retirees are going back to work, which is a pretty significant share. There's a lot of folks, especially in the past few years, who maybe retired a little bit earlier than they had initially planned, and in some cases are kind of rethinking those decisions. So looking at some flexible opportunities to get them back in the workforce, and to kind of look to where they can best fit in the puzzle as well. So I'll kind of pause here, and I think, Will, you're probably good to head to the next slide whenever. I would just say that this is kind of the nutshell of what we've looked at. There is more information here, but I think as we sort of look at all of this, a lot of this is still in flux, and we're constantly looking at new opportunities that we can kind of expand on what we're hearing from membership and across the research. I think workforce is obviously an area where things are constantly changing all of the time. So always looking to keep up with that. But that is all I have on my end. Will, I'll pass it back to you and Daniela if y'all have anything else to add. But thanks for all of you for being here with us today.
Well, thanks so much, Will and Savannah, both for talking through that. I know there's a lot of good stuff, and I included the link to our quarterly report in there. But we did get a question too, kind of on the existing workforce piece, just about the role that transportation plays in being a barrier. So, any thoughts there, kind of on some of those roles as well?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Unfortunately, it's not something that we have quite as good of information on, which is partially why it's not included in the report. But I would say absolutely, especially looking at regions across the state. In Metro Atlanta, public transportation can obviously be a barrier, but we look at like in our rural communities as well. So yes, I would say absolutely. If you could find us some really good data on that, we would absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think survey data is the easiest way to find that kind of stuff, but it is super hard too. I would say anecdotally, we always hear transportation, we always hear childcare. I think seeing the childcare numbers are staggering. It is crazy too. I think that recent research shows that you now pay more per month to send your kid to infant care than you do to college. So, and I think that would probably be especially true with the Hope Scholarship here in Georgia, which is crazy. I think certainly kind of the way that we looked at this was a full birth to work pipeline. We know the huge impact that having a strong foundation plays in building up our early learners so that they do really well as a third grade reader and then they're able to continue on throughout their academic journey, moving through whichever post-secondary path they choose at technical colleges or universities. And I think one thing too is a huge thing is, to think about the economic impact of childcare. But I was wondering, Will and Savannah, if there were any like really big takeaways that y'all had from kind of all the data that was in there. I know you kind of talked through it, but what should kind of our attendees that, really work with clients every day to help make sure they're in stable positions, have good jobs for their families, what would be some big takeaways kind of on the early learning side of how can we continue to shore up this area so that we can have a really robust talent pipeline for the future?
I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, go ahead, Will.
Okay, perfect. Really, I think the biggest thing that we've learned in talking with our membership and doing these reports is figuring out ways to work with your local school systems to engage with the workforce sooner. And how can you kind of have those conversations with either the students or the parents and the families about what are opportunities in your local areas or in the broader region that these students are going to be able to obtain, and how do they go about it, starting from that conversation until they start their first day at the job and beyond. So just opportunities to engage with your local future workforce would be kind of
And
my.
yeah, go ahead.
That's been.
And I was going to say, and I think too, specifically on the early learning piece, if you are an employer talking to your employee base about what their needs are, we've definitely heard some case stories of, for example, if you have maybe a healthcare provider who can look at potentially shifting, times by like an hour for when nurses need to come in so that maybe they are able to drop off their children in the morning and pick them up at a different time. Small changes like that, I think, are relatively feasible for a lot of folks in the industry. But there also may be cases where they don't know that that is needed if their employees are not talking to them about it. So always keeping those open lines of communication obviously is really huge for that and across the board. And I think there are also opportunities in the state, both for things like grants and funding, some tax incentives that work to provide solutions specifically for early childcare. So I know that if you're an employer, you have some opportunities if you provide childcare through your work or have those facilities, that is available to you as well. So I think really just thinking with out of the box solutions, I don't think there is necessarily any one wrong answer. I think you just kind of have to look at what works for you, and then also working with employees to kind of help identify where those opportunities already exist if that's something they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that communication piece is critical because you need to have the good lines of communication with your employees so you're able to better meet their needs, and make sure. So I think from an employer standpoint, always trying to do that engagement and thinking how do you get that real-time feedback, and then thinking through too, how do we better communicate with other providers about kind of what those needs are and how can we do that. K-12 was another big focus in this report. I know we've heard more and more from our members. I would say probably beginning in like 2019 that like K-12 was really where they wanted to invest time and money. Many of them had found a lot of success with their TCSG and US institutions, building partnerships, relationships, but K-12 was kind of that new frontier. And especially because as a lot of industries are seeing more retirements and folks leave the workforce, they're not getting the same kind of intake into the industry that they were leaving the industry. So I think that's really prompted a lot of interest from employers, but I know y'all kind of talk through some of the things that's being done to increase workforce preparedness, but I know, we consistently talk about the fact that 40% of high schoolers leave without ever having some kind of like workforce experience, which is crazy when you think about how are they supposed to be prepared when they enter the workforce if they've never done it before. So it's curious. I know we have some numbers around CTAE in there, but any top takeaways on how we continue to increase the workforce preparedness in our K-12 schools. And two, so that I think, Will, to your point, that they have like a clear understanding of what they'd like to do in higher education. Do I want to go into a technical field? What does it look like to work in healthcare? Do I understand what manufacturing careers look like? All of that information. So any kind of top takeaways from that part?
Will, do you want to? Or you...
Savannah, you want to start off and then I'll follow up?
Yeah, you're good. So I think one of the things that we have seen a push for, especially recently, is, if you can bring your kids to the industry, that's fantastic. Or if you can bring the industry to the kids, that's great as well. So looking at all of the options in between for what that could look like. So if you have opportunities to, take a field trip or bring your kids out into the field and bring them to a manufacturing plant, or maybe take them to a hospital for the day and kind of wherever that's appropriate and available. I think that's really great. But I think folks may also kind of underestimate the value of bringing industry to your kids as well. So even if you can't take them out of school, maybe working with professionals that can either come in and speak to the students or do a demo for them. We've seen a lot of cool projects where schools have done, maybe like competitions to, hey, show off this skill. If you do have CTA in your schools, maybe looking at demonstration like your manufacturing classes or doing elevator pitch competitions, really any way to get your professionals in your industry engaged with students, I think is huge, because they're going to be some of your biggest advocates for getting those students into the industry, especially because, they're looking for that. And then, yes, absolutely. Educating educators, also very important. A lot of those externship programs are really great. Making sure that teachers know what opportunities out there is also really huge so that they can kind of better prepare and relay that to their students too.
Savannah, I think you did a wonderful job on that question. And I think I would just add, kind of reemphasize just as this group is kind of really focused in the workforce development of specific parts of the Metro Atlanta region, really being that advocate between industry and education of how to bridge those gaps. So that way we can educate both sides of the issues about how to propel the workforce into the future.
And to the question about the 40%, so yes, so it's 40% of high school students that essentially are considered unprepared for the workforce. So they have probably never done like a part-time job before or had any real workforce experience, is kind of what we talk about when we mean that.
And I'll just add too, so this is an area that we are spending a lot of time in, and we were really fortunate to be awarded $3 million by the Georgia Department of Education to specifically work in rural school districts that often are under-resourced and don't have as many industry connections, and fewer employers too that are close by to reach to. So we announced at our annual Eggs and Issues breakfast kind of 20 winners that initially received the funding. We should be able to announce another 10 or so in the next week or two that we're really excited about. But we hope that having some of these innovative solutions, they incorporate things from externships, college and career coaches, lots of different services. But we're really excited to see how these programs work locally and kind of what learnings we get and how we can share to provide examples to other communities of how they could replicate or do something similar in their community. So more to come there, but we are really fortunate to have that partnership and be able to kind of try some new things in communities and bolster some existing efforts that have been going on. So it's kind of meeting a lot of different communities in different stages of their workforce preparedness journeys. And so we were excited to be able to have this as another tool. I know we're getting close on time. So, Will and Savannah, Obviously, I think occupational licensing reform has been a huge area of focus for us because it is a regulatory barrier. I know we've worked with some partners like the Georgia Justice Project on Senate Bill 157, which removes barriers for those that may have had some kind of criminal history in the past to make sure that they get more transparency and predictability through the process of being able to be licensed. So for example, right now, if you may have had you wrote a bad check 20 years ago, you want to become a nurse, there's some unpredictability if you actually go to nursing school and do all the things that you need to, that the board at the end could not approve you being a nurse. So that's one piece of legislation. I think too, as we've seen the Georgia General Assembly, begin meeting and introducing bills with the start of session. We've seen a lot of interest in this area too. Lots of leaders thinking about this. And I served on a study committee too, that this was a big focus. So any kind of top takeaways on the occupational licensing reform too, as we start to move through legislative session of what else may come from this?
I think you hit on the bulk of it. I think really just looking at kind of the opportunities of where it's appropriate to get folks back into those occupations, like you said, kind of streamlining those opportunities. Anytime that we can create more certainty for folks around what kind of opportunities are also available to them. Like you said, if you've got someone who writes a bad check, them kind of being able to know ahead of time, here are my options of what I could possibly do. There's so many good employment opportunities out there for them. So if they have the predictability that they are able to say, hey, like I really want to go into the nursing field, obviously a very high demand career. And if they could know ahead of time, kind of before they put all of those resources into going through that process, it's obviously very helpful on both ends. I do know that we also have that legislation moving through on another piece of the occupational licensing about licensing for military spouses. So looking at streamlining that process as well. So I think we'll see some movement on that piece specifically, which again, for Georgia is really huge, even compared to other states of kind of similar demographics. Georgia has a higher veteran population and a really high population of active duty employees. So I think that's another thing that we'll see some stuff come out of. Well, I don't know if there's anything I missed on the legislation piece.
No, but I think you did perfect over covering both everything on the legislative side. But just wanted to add to all of that, it's been mentioned, but reiterate the point that those individuals who did come through the correction system at some point and have some sort of record, getting into these occupations really decreases their chances of re-entering into that to produce kind of more stable lives for them and a stable workforce for the state as a whole. So it really serves a lot of different purposes on the occupational licensing. And I think all are equally important and great in the way that the bill is heading. And we're grateful for the leadership there of several legislators and other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and want to do kind of one more plug before we start wrapping up. We released our 2024 Economic Competitiveness Red Book. You'll see the picture on the screen. I'll enter the digital link, but this is a resource that compares Georgia to all 50 states on a number of metrics related to workforce, infrastructure, economic competitiveness, all in an effort to understand where is Georgia doing really well, and then where are those opportunities that we need to make some strategic investments to change our trajectory. So one, I think that Will and Savannah, y'all talked a lot about was the labor force participation rate. Georgia ranks 42nd in terms of the 5-year growth of the labor force participation rate, which means we're doing a lot worse than a lot of other states. And it's interesting too, because we rank 7th in terms of like job creation over recent years. So it shows that we're creating so many new jobs. There's so much opportunity, but we don't have folks that are able to engage in the workforce. It's often because there are some barriers, and there are some people that are choosing not to engage in the workforce now. So that kind of creates like a dual approach of how do you get people interested in being in the workforce that are currently not, and how do you help those folks that are interested but face barriers. So Red Book is full of all of those things. We also have some specific insights around Metro Atlanta, your hub communities, so think Macon, Augusta, Columbus, and then rural Georgia. So I put the link in there. Please feel free to use it as a resource. And if you want a hard copy, just feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to get one to you. But guys,
And
Just any closing
Oh,
thoughts?
I was just gonna say, and all of the reports are available on there. So our previous Red Book from 2023, if y'all want to do any comparison, and all of our other quarterly reports are on there. They can all be accessed and downloaded.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in infrastructure, small business, rural Georgia, it's all on that link right there, economic reports, and it's on our website. So we are really grateful to have been able to produce it, and you can find more information there. So just as we wrap up, if you are not a Max member, we really encourage you to do so. You can see this is a list of resources that comes with becoming a Max member. If you've got questions, Joy Wilkins' email is right there, but feel free to reach out to myself as well. Happy to kind of talk about the benefits of Max and why it's a good investment for you and your organization. Again, a special thank you to our anchor investors that make all of our programming possible. These are all organizations that are on the forefront of workforce development, and I know a lot of organizations that you work with regularly. So please thank them. And you too can become an anchor investor if you want to. So reach out to Joy and she can kind of talk more about that. But again, appreciate you all joining us this morning. And if you've got more questions about the report, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help and appreciate your time this morning. Thanks again, Will and Savannah, for talking through everything. Really appreciate it.